Now is the time for change. Doing business in the 21st century is made possible with Nkonki, external and internal audit assurance providers. Log on to nkonki.com to find out more.
There are many different forces that impact on businesses and their future. Some of them stem from the natural environment. It's things like climate change, dramatic weather events and fresh water. But businesses planning to be around for the longer term will also have to contend with commodity shortages and rising prices. In this program, we explore the risks and opportunities for businesses. Dr. Bob Skold is systems ecologist at the CSIR and Karen Ireton is head of sustainability management at Standard Bank. I'm Leah Roberts and with me is Mervyn King. Mervyn, despite the increase in dramatic weather events that we've seen in the last decade, do you think that businesses are really aware of the risk?
Well, a board acting as a collective is not aware, is actually failing in its duty of care to the company, because the company doesn't operate in a vacuum. It carries on its business in the triple context of society, the environment and the economy. And how it makes its money impacts on those three. And those three elements impacts on how the company makes its money. It also impacts on the company's product. And the company's product impacts on those three. So if one is thinking strategically, whether it's short, medium and long term, the board should, in the best interest of the company, be taking those factors into account. And if they do not do it, in my view, they are failing in their duty of care to the company.
The board should, but are they?
Yes, I think certainly some of the world's great multinational enterprises are doing exactly that. So I cannot say every company is doing it. But certainly companies that are thinking on an integrated basis, as propagated by the IRC in its framework, are starting to change corporate behavior and their thinking, and incorporating strategically the impacts of how they carry on business on the environment. And they're becoming more and more aware that there are natural assets which they use on a daily basis, which they have to have a strategic long-term plan, because natural assets are finite and diminishing, yet the demand for product is increasing.
Karen, in your view, what is the situation in South Africa? Does the average business really see the risk out there?
Lee, I think it's a bit of a mixed picture. I do think that increasingly companies are starting to realize they've got to address these issues. I don't think they yet know how. I think one of the challenges is that the risk models that are used in many companies are based on historical events. So you model historical events, you model sort of probability and consequence or likelihood of consequence. And I don't think yet many companies are sufficiently able to look into the future and say, if as the climate is changing, the likelihood or the probability would be higher. And the reason I say this is that I'm still being asked questions on a regular basis when I do presentations or other things, but is climate science really proven? Has the probability now been set, or are we still thinking about whether this is real or not real? So I think a lot of those questions are still there, and I think as soon as you drop below the sort of JSE top 40 type companies, you're getting into an area where companies are less likely to have dedicated resources who are able to interpret these things for them.
So Bob, you're a scientist on our esteemed panel. Is this a real risk? Is climate change a real risk, or is it still something that we should only be concerned about 10 or 15 years away?
No, it is a real risk, and I think we have to separate the question of the short term from the long term, in the sense that the decisions that we make now really strongly influence how this will play out in the long term. So it's a bit of a false dichotomy. In fact, we have at this stage a lot more clarity than we've ever had on the climate issue, thanks to the reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which have just been released, and they paint really quite a gloomy picture, but also one that's really crystal clear. Climate change is happening. It is due to human influence. Fortunately, there are things we can do about it. They won't necessarily be easy, but it's not like we're in the lap of the gods.
What should we be doing then?
We have to do two things, really. A certain amount of climate change at this stage is inevitable, and so we have to put into place actions to adapt to that change. Altering our form of agriculture, looking at our water supplies, making sure that our health systems are up to speed on it. On the other hand, unless we take serious action on mitigation, in other words, avoiding further climate change, we get into a space which just isn't adaptable.
If we all just ignore this and pie in the sky, business as usual, what does it mean?
Well, I think it's going to be disastrous, because the biggest user of natural assets is the organisation, be it public or private. And as I said before, natural assets are finite and diminishing. So if they don't take account of this, the way they carry on business, you spoke about business as usual. They have to carry on business as unusual. If they just carry on as before and just use assets, and I think the great example of that is the beverage manufacturer. The great beverage manufacturers today are very aware that they're dealing with the scarcest commodity on planet Earth, namely water. So I'll mention some names. SAB Miller is tied up with WWF and looking at the conservation of water at all their breweries. Coca-Cola has this long-term plan of reduce, replenish and recycle and reuse water. So they are addressing it, but as Karen said, I'm talking about 105 of the world's iconic companies, which I know, and I know they're doing it. But I think what is interesting, Ali, is that it's also a case I've witnessed now around the world of follow my leader. It's suddenly companies are thinking, hang on a sec, why is this leading
mentality.
company? Yes. Well, why is this leading company in my industry doing this? And what are the benefits? Oh, they are achieving benefits. So I'm seeing a lot of follow my leader.
But we're not there yet. So what happens in terms of, what do the scientists say, that if we don't do this, in a hurry, what increase will we see in global temperature, and what does it mean for South Africa?
Well, if we look at the business as usual scenario, by the end of the century, that means a global warming of about 4 degrees above the pre-industrial benchmark. But the trick on this in the South African context is that South Africa warms at about close to the global rate, which would mean about 8 degrees above pre-industrial. And that, to me, is close to unsurvivable in Southern Africa. It means essentially that every day, the average day becomes as hot as the hottest day you've ever experienced.
That is just such a horrid scenario, Karen. But so fresh water in South Africa is particularly important.
Absolutely.
But still, it doesn't seem to get the prominence that it deserves amongst businesses, amongst consumers.
I think part of the problem is, Bob's just given us some really interesting detail around what will happen at the turn of the century. Most of us can't think that far ahead. We're thinking next
we're all
year,
short term.
the next 5 years, whatever. Water, I think, is slightly different. We've all, even in our lifetimes, experienced either critical drought or significant flood, both of which are quite devastating in terms of the impact on the water resources and the quality of the water, because it's not only quantum, it's quality that affects your ability to grow food, your ability for people to survive, and of course the changing temperature just exaggerates every natural process that's going on. So I think with companies, you've got the heavy impact companies, the organizations like the beverage companies where water is a primary input, organizations like the mining companies where in order to undertake their activity they have to have access to quite a lot of water. They tend to be relatively aware. I think it's in the sort of indirect impacts that people really have a problem. And just look around Johannesburg. Most people in Johannesburg don't know that the water they're drinking is coming from Lesotho, and that without that water from Lesotho, we would not be surviving in Joburg. If you look, by the mid-century, the Johannesburg population is expected to double. We are one of the largest cities on the planet without a water source, a major river, or we've got some springs that originate here that become rivers elsewhere, but we really are hampered by access to water currently from somewhere else. Now, if in the scenarios that change, that ability to access that water changes, what will we do as a major city?
Yeah, and what will we do as average consumer? Now, many businesses say that they're reluctant to change to go green because consumers don't care.
Yeah.
Is this a real issue?
Well, I don't agree with that statement. I think society does agree. There's that famous sentence taken in isolation by Margaret Thatcher, there's no such thing as society. Now, people have quoted that often, and it was a sentence uttered by her, but she said it in a whole paragraph. And the paragraph was at a time when she was dealing with the unions, and she was trying to smash the unions, if you remember. And what she was saying is, in effect in the paragraph, you can't as individuals out there depend on government to give you handouts. You've got to get off your bottoms, and you've got to do things individually for yourself. You are individuals. There's tapestry of individuals. That was her next paragraph. It's a tapestry of individuals that make up society. And this tapestry is starting to react to things. Society is reacting. If you look at the Wall Street occupiers, St. Paul's Cathedral, I think Marikana is an example of reaction to these things.
It does seem to be happening in more advanced economies, but is it happening in South Africa? Is there average consumer awareness?
Lee, I would say that we're still at the point where there are a few advanced companies and a group of well-informed or better-informed individuals who are able to join the dots and say, this product or this type of lifestyle is having this consequence, and therefore something has to change. Either I can't keep up the lifestyle, or I change the way I deliver that lifestyle. I think that for many South Africans, we're still caught in a trap, a very immediate trap of needing to immediately improve quality of life or immediately do something, whether that's position ourselves as having advanced over the last 20 years or the last 30 years. So I still think that there is quite a long way to go, but I agree with Mervyn. There are leaders out there, individuals and companies, and what we need to do is make the argument, make it more persuasive that one follows those leaders.
Bob, give me your quick view. We're running out of time in this section. Do consumers in South Africa care?
I think that the dichotomy between here, now and the future is not real in any of these contexts. We have real problems with both water and climate right now. The things that we would do to fix that right now do us good in the future.
We're going to break now, but please do stay with us as there's plenty more on business risks arising from the natural capital when we come back.
Nkonki has the professional capacity to deliver on your external and internal audit assurance requirements. Visit nkonki.com for more.